Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Hariharan from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. The paper that we have is 20th century British literature, in which now we are looking at George Bernard Shaw's all-time classic Pygmalion. Let's begin with some background, the historical background. We'll have to begin with the Edwardian Georgian period. This is the historical period covering the rule of Edward VII from 1901 to 1910 and that of King George V from 1910 to 1936. This period marked the end of the Victorian era and the emergence of modernist movements. This was again the age of the two world wars. This is the background that we have to bear in mind. George Bernard Shaw was a philosopher, a social activist, a socialist, a pacifist. Now that is very important. He was a pacifist, he was a vegetarian, teetotaler. A teetotaler is a person who doesn't take drinks. Satirist, polemicist and a dramatist. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1925. He was a man who was known for many things. He was born in Dublin in 1856. His mother was a music trainer. His father was an alcoholic. He finished his formal education in Dublin. He worked as a clerk. He went to London, after that joined his sister and mother there, and then we must say he was a self-taught man. He taught himself at the British Museum. He began his career as music and drama critic and did publish novels that were rather insignificant. What we see here is a man who tried his hands at many things. Shaw was a radical reformist. He was a man of ideas. These are a couple of things that we have to keep in mind when we look at some of the major plays that Shaw wrote and his concept of his idea of mankind. He pioneered in 1884 the Fabian Society during 1885 to 1911. That was an amazing thing that we very often forget. He was one of those who was very much instrumental in founding the London School of Economics. He espoused socialist ideas such as abolition of private property, called for a radical change in the voting system. He was one man who wanted to reform English spelling, the alphabet. He was a renowned public speaker. He was known for his quick wit, his sense of farce, which earned him the nickname Laughing Philosopher. Shaw was very much profoundly influenced by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen, that he went on to write a book titled The Quintessence of Ibsenism before even presenting his first play on stage. Shaw introduced social, political criticism and problem plays in England. Now this was thanks to the influence of Ibsen. He was influenced by the philosophical ideas of Henry Bergson. As a theatre critic, he argued that a theatre of ideas should replace the sentimental theatre of the time. Shaw wrote his plays with a mission. He had an agenda in his mind. He wanted to expose the hypocrisy and complacency of British society. There is this disclaimer, so to speak, a warning that he gives to his readers. What is that warning? He says, "I must warn my readers that my attacks are directed against themselves, not against my stage figures," he said. Now let us look at his stagecraft. Shaw as a theatre personality. He wanted to force his viewers to face the reality of unpleasant events. And this is what you have in many of his plays, most of his plays. He promoted these plays, these unpleasant plays, by writing very, very long prefaces, which were very, very argumentative, where he would set out his views, and very often some of these prefaces would be longer than the plays. He is known for his humor, his very sharp wit, his power of language, very musical. All these kept his audience enthralled, spellbound. Now, let us introduce Pygmalion. In this play, Shaw uses humor and lively characterization to explore 4 distinct areas. Language is one, class structure, education, and gender, to influence how people are seen by society. How are people seen by society? Now, all these do influence people. Now, the title Pygmalion, it goes back to an ancient Greek myth of Pygmalion and Galatea. In this old story, in this myth, Pygmalion was a gifted sculptor who had resolved that he will remain a chronic bachelor, a person who will never marry. And he starts creating a statue. This is a statue of a beautiful woman. And then he falls in love with the statue. He feels miserable because he is now hopelessly in love with a lifeless object. He now prays to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who makes the statue come alive. Pygmalion marries her and he names her Galatea. This is the story. This is the Greek story. What Shaw has done is to take that and then rework it in London at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, look at the pictures that you have of England at the turn of the 20th century. We will now try to look at the important characters here. We will identify at least 5 major characters. There are the roles that can be discussed, the relationships that they have, the conflicts that they have, the significance that they have. There are these 4 areas that can be looked at. So what I am going to do here is to briefly describe the name of the character and their role, and I would urge you to look at the visuals to understand more about their relationships and the conflicts that they have and the significance that they have in the play. We'll start with Eliza Doolittle. Eliza Doolittle is the heroine of this play. She is a poor Cockney flower girl who dreams of a good upper class life. Now, here itself the class question is presented. So she comes from a lower middle class family. She is a flower girl. Professor Higgins. Professor Higgins is a cocky, arrogant phonetician of London who trains Eliza to use good English and turn her into an aristocrat. Now, he obviously is aristocratic. Now, he does this because there is a wager, and he had said that he will make anyone for that matter an aristocrat if he is able to train this person for at least 6 months. And it's based on this wager that he does this. It is not out of love for people from the lower middle class or the lower class. It's out of this wager that he does this. A very unemotional kind of a man. Colonel Pickering. Now, Colonel Pickering is Professor Higgins's very close friend, who is Indologist from the Indian Colonial Service, who has been studying, when I say Indologist, is a person who is studying the very many dialects of India. And he is now in London trying to do his research. Now, Mrs. Pierce. Mrs. Pierce is Professor Higgins's housekeeper, who also looks after Eliza Doolittle and is concerned about her future. Freddie Eynsford-Hill. Freddie is Eliza's lover, for whom she also has a fascination. There are other characters also in this play. We have looked at the 5 most important major characters. Now, I am not going to, as I said, talk about the other things here. It is all there, you can see that for yourself. We will now briefly try to grasp the story in this play. Henry Higgins is a British professor of phonetics who makes a bet with his friend Colonel Pickering that he can successfully train a Cockney flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, to speak fluent upper class accent and train her in etiquette, become a refined society lady and take her into embassy. Now, the very interesting thing here is the bet itself, where he says that he can make this person speak fluent English with an upper class accent and train her in etiquette. Now, this is something that we are familiar with, in the sense that today we talk about the acquisition of soft skills. So it's possible to relate to Professor Higgins in the sense that here was somebody who was trying to impart certain life skills to this person, who then can be passed off as an aristocratic lady. Not that it's not that he wanted her to become aristocratic, right? It's all a bet. Higgins is joined by his friend Colonel Pickering, who bets on it. They set out to transform Eliza as an experiment. So she in a way becomes the guinea pig, and they succeed. But it leads to complications. Eliza submits to the training because she comes there, she says, look, I want to do this. Now she is left with an identity crisis. Now you have this play being done into a very successful film, which is shown probably in every other English department in the country. And the name of the film is My Fair Lady. So don't forget to watch My Fair Lady. Now let's return to this play. Eliza submits to the training but is left with an identity crisis because she has received this training that an aristocratic lady would receive, but with all this training she still has to go back and then sell flowers. So she becomes in a way a misfit there, and she cannot fit in here as well. So this is the identity crisis that she has. She is now neither the flower girl nor the aristocratic lady that they wanted her to become. Now what are the major themes that we have here? Speech and language. These two things decide and identify a person's socio-economic class. Now we just need to think about this a little bit. We just need to go back and look at our own surroundings to understand this. A second theme that this play has is social mobility, which is based on wealth and manners. We could see all this in the way in which Doolittle goes about in this play. Nature versus nurture. This is a theme that seems to be recurring in much of 20th century English literature. There is also this conflict between man and woman in this play. Now Higgins somehow doesn't like her, but then he is rather cold-blooded. He's a man who has no affections, and there is a young man who likes Liza Doolittle. Conventional morality and social snobbery. These are two other themes that you have in this play. Now these two things, this whole question of morality and social snobbery is something that Shaw takes to task in many of his plays. For example, a play like Mrs. Warren's Profession, or Arms and the Man, or Joan of Arc, The Doctor's Dilemma, right? In all these plays you have Shaw doing this, questioning, problematizing some of these mores and codes of society. Let us look at the background of this play very quickly. The rigid structure of English society is ridiculed in this play. See, England has a very rigid class structure. You have the working class, they form the foundation, and you have the middle class who build on them, and then you have the upper class. It's a three-tier system, and they are exclusive. Nothing will pass. You cannot pass from one class to another class. So if you are from the working class, you have no entry, no access to the middle class. If you are from the middle class, you can gain no access to upper class. This class structure is something that Shaw ridicules in this play. Now, the two main characters here in this play, Eliza Doolittle, this poor flower girl with a Cockney accent, has no social graces, but she is very ambitious. She would like to go places, and she is proud. She is a very proud girl. Now, proud doesn't mean that she is headstrong. She is a very determined girl. Proud in the sense of determined. Henry Higgins, he is obviously from the upper class. He is arrogant, insensitive. He uses her, as I said earlier, as a guinea pig to test out his theory, his pet theory of class and language. So he is a theorist in a way. Eliza meets Higgins in the portico of St. Paul's. He thinks he can change her into an upper class lady. Pickering joins him. And then what happened? Eliza next visits Pickering to get trained, wants to learn to speak properly so that she can get a job in a flower shop instead of selling flowers on the street. Higgins mocks her first, but then later on changes his mind and takes up this challenge. Eliza lives in a house with Mr. Pickering under the supervision of Mrs. Pierce, and she goes through very, very difficult times because she has to adjust in a very different social, familial setup, and therefore life is very difficult for her. Now, there is another character here who somehow makes Higgins very uncomfortable, and that is Eliza's father. Her father keeps coming there for money. It makes everyone there uncomfortable. So with the help of Pickering and the housekeeper Mrs. Pierce, it takes time for Mrs. Pierce to gradually start liking Doolittle. He teaches Eliza proper speech and manners of the upper caste. So the training goes on. So there is education. This whole question of education comes in. Eliza is insulted, but then she puts up with all these insults and the lack of sympathy that Higgins has for her. Higgins sees her purely, as I said earlier, as an object upon which certain experiments could be done. He refuses and fails to see her as a human being. Eliza, on the other hand, wants to be treated with respect, and she gets that respect. She is recognized as a person only by Pickering and Mrs. Pierce, not Higgins. Higgins's experiment succeeds. Eliza is introduced to high society. She also amuses people when she talks and offends certain others by her unwitting remarks. She also gets a lover, but there is a big question that she has to confront. Her class has changed. What about her future? What lies ahead for her? Look what happens. She returns from this grand party at the ambassadors. She realizes that she cannot go on with Professor Higgins anymore. She fights with him, quarrels with him. The reason is very simple. She wants to be treated as a human being. There is this jewelry that he had given her, fake jewelry. She returns all that jewelry and then she runs away. Both Higgins and Pickering are alarmed that she has run away. She takes refuge now in Mrs. Higgins' house, Higgins' mother. They find her there. The son now comes running to the mother. But Eliza has decided one thing. She will not return to Higgins. Freddie is waiting for her. Now, Alfred Doolittle, her father, now somehow has got a bounty from a dead millionaire. There is some wealth that he seems to have acquired because a millionaire has died, and now he was at the lower rungs. Now that he is a millionaire, he gets married again, and Alfred Doolittle becomes a middle class man now because he is rich. There is wealth now. When we look at this play, these are the important themes that come up in this play. What we will do is we have looked at most of these things in the course of trying to summarize the major arguments in the play and some of the events that happen in the play. So let's try to sum up the things that we have seen here. The theme, we have looked at the theme. This is a problem play. We know what a problem play is. We also have noticed the element of satire in this. We have noticed that there is a lot of humor here, wit, farcical elements. We also have made note of Shaw's style, his language. It's difficult to really give a lecture on drama, that too a problem play, Shaw's play, which has, in a way, when you look at the printed text, you would have the general preface, Shaw's preface, which is worth reading to understand how Shaw conceived of theatre and what he set out to do and why he has written a play like this. Now, it's important that students read the preface and the play. These are plays that were immensely successful on stage, so it would be a mistake to think that these are plays that were written primarily to be read. No. So I would urge that you read the preface as well as the play, so that you will get to know how Shaw was trying to address certain issues in society and how he conceived of the problem play. Thank you.